We turn now to the midterm elections, less than 2 weeks away. 36 of the 50 governorships are up for grabs this year, and while Republicans currently control 3/4 of them, Democrats are mounting surprisingly strong challenges in some key places across the country. To talk about a few of these, I'm joined by Bill Nygaard of Georgia Public Broadcasting in Atlanta, Frederica Freiberg of Wisconsin Public Television in Madison, and Tom Hudson of WLRN Public Radio in Miami. Hello to all three of you. We're so glad to have you with us. I'm going to start with the biggest population state. Tom Hudson, of course, that's Florida, and you. The incumbent Republican Governor Rick Scott is giving that up to run for the U.S. Senate, and it's turned into a pretty tight race between the Democratic mayor of Tallahassee and Republican Congressman Ron DeSantis. Tell us what each one of these men has going in their favor and what's working against them.
Well, this is not a boulevard election in Florida. There is no middle of the road. This is as polarizing of a state election that you're going to find here in this election cycle, Judy. I think that what you have is, on one side, an excited progressive Democrat in the face of Andrew Gillum, who excited base voters to come out in the primary and surprised a lot of pollsters and a lot of professional political watchers to win in a very crowded Democratic primary. And on the other hand, you have a non-traditional Republican candidate in the form of Congressman Ron DeSantis, who has run on the playbook of 2016 Donald Trump and very successfully, who beat back a much more traditional Republican candidate in the primary. So for voters, 30% of Florida voters that are non-party affiliated, they did not participate in the August primary. You have to be registered in one party or the other to vote.
Right.
This is where the battleground is. This is why I say this is not a boulevard type of election. There is no middle ground. They are fighting tooth and nail for each and every one of those votes, and they count. The last two Florida gubernatorial elections have been decided by fewer than 70,000 votes.
Okay, well, in terms of what they have going for and against them, the issues, I'm going to come back to you on that, but I do want to get quickly to Georgia and to Bill Nygaard. Bill, this governor's seat, the Republicans have held it for decades, but you now have a fiery Democrat in Stacey Abrams, who happens to be an African-American woman, running against the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp. She's giving him a run for their money. What are the main factors at this point in this race?
This is a very, very tight race, according to virtually every poll. It's a race of contrasts, a strong Democrat against a strong conservative Republican. Abrams has been focusing like a laser on a couple of really key issues. She wants to expand Medicaid in Georgia, and she's focusing on education, on public education. So she's been very, very focused on issues. She's also been attacking Brian Kemp over issues of voter suppression. We've gotten a lot of national attention, as you well know, Judy, because there are people who think that the Secretary of State, Brian Kemp, now running for governor, has, over the years, excluded people from the voter rolls, African Americans who are being denied the right to vote. That's a somewhat unknown issue here. We're not quite sure how methodical and deliberative it's been, but certainly the optics suggest there have been some problems there. Brian Kemp's been on the attack. They debated here last night, and Brian Kemp spent a great deal of his time repeating a theme that he's used throughout the race, which is that Stacey Abrams is a radical. She's too liberal for Georgia. She's getting money from national Democratic forces outside of the state. And he's focused on that as a big part of the race.
Let's turn to Wisconsin. Frederica Freiberg, the Republican incumbent Governor Scott Walker, this is his fourth run, if you count the recall election he won in 2010. And he's run into surprisingly strong opposition from Tony Evers. Tell us about this race. What are the factors working in both sides?
Well, it's true. Scott Walker and Tony Evers are in what is projected to be a very tight race. I mean, 1 or 2 point race, according to experts. So Tony Evers is the superintendent of public instruction in Wisconsin, and he is kind of staking this claim to being the education governor. But Scott Walker is now saying that he is the education governor because he infused his state budget with new money for K-12 schools. And so this is something that these candidates have been fighting back and forth over, including a really difficult achievement gap, racial achievement gap in the state's urban school districts, which are among the worst in the nation, and each of them are blaming each other over this. But yes, Scott Walker finds himself in a tighter race than he might have thought he would have had.
And Tom Hudson, back to you on Florida. Just quickly, what matters most to voters this year? How much of a factor is President Trump?
President Trump is an enormous factor here in the Florida gubernatorial election. I think on the issue side, it is health care. There's debate around pre-existing conditions and Congressman DeSantis' position federally on the Affordable Care Act as it comes to pre-existing conditions. And of course, on the Democratic side, Andrew Gillum pledging support to expand Medicaid, which also has not been expanded here in the state of Florida under the Affordable Care Act. Also, the environment, which traditionally has never been a real driving, motivating issue here. But this is another lost summer that we've had in Florida. We've had blue-green algae in Lake Okeechobee, the big blue lake in the center of the state. And then we've also had the naturally occurring red tide, a more stronger outbreak of red tide in the Gulf Coast and also on the Atlantic side. So it has put water quality front and center in this gubernatorial campaign for both parties that we haven't seen in elections past.
Bill Nygut, what about issues, factors in the race in Georgia, and in particular President Trump?
Trump has not been much of a factor in the general election campaign. He's tweeted a couple times now his support for Brian Kemp. Kemp doesn't talk about him a lot on the campaign trail. And Stacey Abrams has not been spending a great deal of her time attacking him. And I think the simple reason for that is Trump won Georgia by 5 or so points, but I think both sides recognize that Trump, as we've seen in other races, can be as much of a distraction as he is an advantage. He might motivate Democrats as much as Republicans.
And Frederica Freiberg, President Trump is in Wisconsin today.
That's right. In fact, he is arriving in the kind of north central part of the state later this afternoon. This is a part of the state that Trump won by double digits. And so his visit is expected, of course, to kind of energize and boost the Republican base. And that's what Republicans and Governor Walker are hoping happens. However, as your last guest just suggested, Democrats are thinking that his appearance here also boosts their base. So already large lines are forming for President Trump, who again is appearing in one of these counties that he won by double digits. There were 23 counties in the state of Wisconsin in 2016 that had previously voted for Barack Obama, who then turned and voted for Donald Trump.
A rural part of Wisconsin. And finally, back to you, Tom Hudson, on the other, I guess you'd call them the X factors in this race, charges of corruption, and then, frankly, some racism.
Absolutely. Race is playing an enormous role also in this. As far as the corruption investigation, this is an FBI investigation that has centered around some of the doings in Tallahassee. Andrew Gillum, the mayor of Tallahassee, the Democratic candidate, has consistently said that the FBI tells him he is not a target of this investigation. The latest flap is over who paid for tickets to the Hamilton Broadway show during an Andrew Gillum visit to New York several years ago. That's due to come up certainly tonight in the last gubernatorial debate between Gillum and Representative DeSantis. So the character question certainly comes into play. There's no doubt about it. And on race, this was from the get-go. DeSantis, Congressman DeSantis, the morning after winning the primary with his monkey up comments, there have been some flirtations with other white supremacist and white nationalist group that he's had to defend and push back against.
I want to thank all three of you. Tom Hudson in Florida, Frederica Freiberg in Wisconsin, Bill Nygut in Georgia. Thank you, all three.
Thanks, Judy.